Welcome to EdSpace, in which we discuss some of the highlights of the week's news with our editor, Sukumar. Thanks for joining us, Sukumar. Let's start with the economy. Earlier this week, the RBI announced in its mid-year review that the economy might be finally bottoming out and projected 6% growth for the last 2 quarters of the financial year. How hopeful do you think we should be based on these results?
I think not just based on what RBI has said, but if you look at other data that's coming out, and if you look at the kind of noise that companies are now beginning to make, the kind of things CEOs are beginning to say, I do think that we are seeing the end of the slowdown. The economy is bottoming out, and forget the next 2 quarters. I think if you were to take 2012-13 as a financial year and then 13-14, I do think that we will grow much faster in 13-14 than we did in 12-13. When I say much faster, it's of course a relative term, but I think if you were to look at it in absolute terms, I think we would grow a full percentage point higher in 2013-14 than we do in 12-13. The jury is still out on how much we will do in 12-13 for a full year basis. Could be 5.5%, could be closer to 6%, but whatever we do, we'll do a full percentage point higher next year.
And Raghuram Rajan, the chief economic advisor, has said that he thinks we need more measures to boost the economy. What other things can the government do to try and stimulate growth?
So I think a lot of people like to speak about reforms, and it's a term that's used very loosely. I think many of the easy reforms have been done, right? I think what the government needs to focus now is on 2 things. The first thing, and this is actually far simpler than the second thing, is to create a climate which is conducive for investment. How do you do that? You do that by having clear policies. You do that by ensuring that the policies are stable, which means they don't change with political regimes. They don't suddenly become retrospective. And you have clear redressal mechanisms and regulatory mechanisms. If you look at what this government has done, it hasn't really covered itself in glory in how it's dealt with various independent regulators. It's tried to erode that authority of several independent regulators. That again sends out a bad signal to investors. Now, if you do all this, you'd create a climate which is very, very conducive for foreign investment, and you get more investment in, obviously, the wheels of the economy will continue to turn, and the economy will grow faster. The second thing is what people call second-generation reforms, right? Which include serious labor sector reforms, financial sector reforms, government reforms itself, and these are far tougher to do, right? Because it requires a government which is willing to do this. It requires a strong leader, and it requires a strong leader who has a legislative majority behind him. Doesn't really work in a government where you're not just a coalition, but you're a minority coalition, and then you're forever dependent on people who can't be trusted, and whose views keep changing for support. So you have to do that. So I don't think we should go down that road. So every time someone uses the term reforms, I wonder whether what we are seeing are really reforms. But I think this government can really work hard towards creating an excellent climate for investment. The direct tax code and the GST are again part of that, creating that climate. Are they reforms? Not particularly. They are changes, right? They're improvements in how we do things. The direct tax code, for instance, will ensure that tax rates are stable, and because they're codified and they don't change from year to year. And now if you're an investor, that's something that you want. You don't want your tax rates to change every year.
And this week as well, 2 bills passed through the Rajya Sabha, the Debt Recovery Bill and the Banking Bill. So if these bills are enacted, what would they mean for banks who are trying to reduce the amount of bad loans on their books? How would they help them to do that?
See, the Banking Amendment Bill itself, one of the things it does is it makes it easier for banks to recover their dues. And this is very significant because if you look at the quantum of debt restructuring activity that banks have been forced to do in the last 18 months, it's very, very significant. It runs into hundreds of thousands of crores, right? At least it's over 100,000 crores. And the reason that's happened is because you look at large companies, and many of the large companies are completely weighed down by debt. Some of this is on account of payments they've had to make. In the case of the telecom companies, it's for third generation spectrum. In some of these are on account of acquisitions that these companies have made overseas. But the fact is, all of them have huge debt. And most of the lenders are local banks. Some of them, of course, borrowed from foreign banks also, but most of the lenders are local banks. Now, this is a bit of a dichotomy in some ways, because if you look at it, the Indian banks aren't very big. If you look at the global scheme of things, Chinese banks are big, European banks are big, American banks are big, Indian banks are not big. I don't think there's a single Indian bank in the top 20 banks, if you were to look at asset size. So every time they have to make a big loan, and a big loan could be something like 5,000 crores, say, or sometimes even 3,000 crores, you have to form a syndicate. So you get together with other banks, and then you issue these loans. And these are the kind of loans that a lot of these companies are now finding it difficult to pay back. Now, the fact is, you're not the sole lender. You work in a syndicate system, so you have to sit down with the other banks. You have to work out a mechanism on how the loans can be restructured, the payments can be made, and all that. And in many cases, what's happened is, my own feeling is that these banks are throwing good money after bad. Relaxing the repayment norms and giving the promoters some more money in the hope that the companies will pay back the money. I'm not so sure that that's the right thing to do. But whatever be the case, this bill will make it easier for them to recover their dues at a time when there's not been a frightfully huge increase in the quantum of bad loans per se, but there's been a huge increase in the quantum of loans being restructured. And if things don't improve, either at the macroeconomic level or at the micro corporate level, then restructured loans are the kind of loans that will turn bad 6, 10, 18 months, 15 months in the future.
Okay.
So it's something that will help.
So just moving to politics, we've got the results in from the elections in Gujarat and Himachal Pradesh. It seems like in Gujarat, Modi has reconfirmed his mandate, but the BJP seems to have fared pretty badly in Himachal. Just with an eye on the forthcoming general elections, whenever they might be, what do you take away? What's your verdict on these results for both the BJP and Congress?
The first thing is the Congress hasn't done as badly as everyone thought it would do. Right? If you read some news reports that were emerging, one thought they would get wiped out in Gujarat. They haven't got wiped out. They've done just as badly as they did last time. Or you can say they've done just as well as they did last time, but because they've got around 60 seats in the assembly, which is not huge, so they've done as badly as they did last time. In Himachal, of course, they've got a victory which many people are surprised by, but if you actually break it down and look at the individual constituency level, the quantum of victory for individual seats is actually quite small. So it was a far tighter election than the final numbers tally seems to indicate. A lot of people thought that the Congress would get wiped out in both states and were predicting an early election. What's happened now is that the Congress actually has won one state, and there's really no change in the other state. Irrespective of whatever else is being said qualitatively, Modi was Chief Minister at the head of a majority government. He will continue to be Chief Minister as the head of a majority government in Gujarat. So nothing really changes as far as the Congress is concerned. So this should and could sort of energize them into continue doing the kind of things they've been doing for the last 3-4 months, because the last 3-4 months, one of the things we've seen is they've unveiled a rash of reforms, right? I think I sort of used the word reforms they've unveiled a rash of policy measures, and it'll be interesting to see whether they continue to do the same thing, because now stability is no longer in question. It's still a minority coalition government and all that, but I don't think there is now that general election looming large on the horizon. It's going to happen in 2014. I think that much can be said with certainty.
Is your view that if there's a newfound stability, they might pull back on some of these new policy initiatives or reforms?
Not really.
Or do you think they might forge ahead? Will that encourage them?
I think they'll just press the pedal on that and go full steam ahead. They'll try and do more. I don't think they'll try and do less. And there's a lot more that they can do. So I have a feeling that they'll do more. Had they lost both states, and had they lost both states very badly, They might have been tempted to become more populist in their thinking. They might have been tempted to not do some of the hard things the tough measures that some of the hard things they've done, and then roll back some of the tough measures that they've put in place, especially with relation to subsidies. But now that that's not happened, I think it's business as usual, and you can just go ahead and do what you think is right for the economy and the country at this point in time.
Okay, thanks so much for those insights, Sukumar. And thank you very much for watching. Please stay tuned for more.